Hello and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones and we thank you so much for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about a number of issues, including bullying. It's a serious issue that affects children of all ages and can begin as early as preschool and become more intense in middle school and continue all the way through high school. We're going to be talking about policies in the state to protect victims. That's coming up. First up, though, Governor Phil Murphy would like to ban gas vehicles in New Jersey in favor of more electric cars. But there are some who want to put the brakes on that legislation, including my first guest. Ray Cantor is Vice President of Government Affairs for the New Jersey Business and Industry Association. Ray joins us now. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Laura, appreciate you having us on.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about what NJBIA has to say about the governor's stance on electric vehicles or banning gasoline vehicles.
Well, we generally support, electric vehicles. It's a great technology. It may be the wave of the future. The problem is what the governor is proposing is to ban all gas-powered vehicles by 2035. This would begin a mandate to have EVs be at 43% of new car sales by 2027, really only 3 years away from now. And there are going to be lots of bad implications if we move forward with this policy.
I mean, a week can be a lifetime in politics. So, Governor Murphy, he's the governor now. But, looking at something to 2035, how realistic could this be? And where is the legislature on this?
All excellent questions. So while the ban ultimately would ban all gas-powered cars by 2035, it begins to ramp up, as I mentioned, in model year 2027, where 43% of all new car sales must be electric vehicles. We're only at 8% right now of sales electric vehicles. That's an amazing ramp up. And the problem is these cars largely, for most people in the state, especially low and moderate income folks, are not affordable. So you're going to have a lot of people in the state who won't be able to own cars anymore because they just can't afford it. Then there's the issue of where are they going to charge these vehicles? And we're not just talking about public charging stations. Most people who own EVs charge in their homes. They have a garage, they park the car there, they charge overnight. For them, it's relatively convenient. But we have a lot of people in the state who live in dense urban areas who don't have their own garages. We have people in apartment complexes. We have people living in condos. It's just not feasible at all that these folks will have any place, even if they wanted the EV, even if they can afford an EV, they would not be able to charge their vehicle. So this is going to have tremendous impacts to those people who won't be able to have cars anymore. And then if people don't have cars, they can't travel around the state. They can't frequent a local restaurant. They can't go down to the shore. They can't even see their doctor. So this is a proposal to change a fundamental way of how we live and do business in New Jersey. We think the legislature needs to be involved in this type of decision.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about how it affects businesses. People going to the doctor, going to restaurants, going to small businesses, going to their local grocery stores. Have they looked that far ahead about how businesses would then have to provide charging stations for the cars, for their employees who are parking there all day long, and the cost of that infrastructure on so many businesses and industries?
If you read the rule proposal that the Department of Environmental Protection put out, and they're, by the way, relying on California because what they're really doing is just incorporating the California rule into New Jersey rule, they recognize that all these things are issues that need to be resolved, but they're not putting forth any solutions to these. Now, we would argue that before you fundamentally change how transportation works in the state, before you fundamentally change how people move around and how they travel and frequent smaller businesses, that these issues be resolved up front. Again, if you look at some of the statements being made by proponents of this, in government, they recognize that there are going to be a lot of people who won't be able to own cars anymore. They recognize that. They're not touting that. They're not saying that's what's going to happen, but they recognize that. Their solution, well, we'll have more EV buses in disadvantaged communities, and people will have to ride share or buy bikes. We don't think that's the type of solution that we should be putting forth in New Jersey, at least not until we have a much larger conversation and get the legislature involved, as opposed to just one department in the executive branch.
I mean, and when you think about people who just go to get their cars inspected when it's time for inspection, a lot of people don't have the money to get their cars that are already bought and paid for up to code. I mean, that in and of itself is an expense on everybody.
No, absolutely. Cars are expensive, but they're also in New Jersey, the way we're structured, we're a suburban state, we're spread out. It's a necessity. So people do what they can, they buy the car that they can. Again, and once you do this, EVs aren't going to be affordable for comparable cars for a lot of people. But even more, once you start limiting the supply of gas powered cars, just from a simple supply and demand perspective, the cost of used cars are going to go up as well. So you'll hear some proponents saying, "Oh well, it's you can always buy a used vehicle. Used vehicles are half the market already." No, you're going to start seeing a lot less vehicles available. You're going to start seeing the price of all cars, both EVs and gas-powered used vehicles, go up immediately. We think as soon as this rule gets adopted, you're going to start seeing the market forces happen, and more people will not be able to afford cars. This is a serious problem.
I mean, the cost of new cars today is more than what I think my parents paid for their house back in the 80s. It's frightening when you just look at, and it's not even necessarily a fancy car.
And you're seeing the loans on cars go out more and more years, so people can actually afford something. I was just talking to someone very recently who wanted to buy an electric vehicle, but they needed a larger car for their family. And they were looking for an eight-seat car, and they could not find anything below $70,000. That's just not affordable. So while folks may say, well, the average price of electric vehicle with incentives is not that much different than a gas-powered car, if you're comparing size vehicles, yeah, they are different. You can't compare the need for a larger vehicle, that gas-powered car, to the cost of a small electric vehicle and say they're comparable. They're not.
Yeah, and also with people who are getting the electric vehicles, they're not paying the gas tax, and that gas tax is what helps fund keeping our roads in working condition. And New Jersey is probably one of the most heavily traveled state, not just for people in New Jersey, but people coming in and out of New York, Philadelphia. They're going through New Jersey.
Yeah, again, and that's another issue that's going to need to be worked out. Even if we don't have this mandate, as I mentioned, we're already at 8% electric vehicles, and that's 8% of cars, that are being sold that aren't paying the gas tax right now. So one way or the other, we're going to have to address this issue. There's going to have to be some different way of funding, our road infrastructure than a gas tax, even without this mandate.
And to be clear, you're New Jersey business and industry, you're not against electric vehicles at all. It's just the mandate and the timeline. So how do you work then to kind of come up with a compromise to where there are more electric vehicles on the road and places for people to be able to charge their car for those who choose, and the reality of this situation? How do you strike that happy medium?
We've been supportive of incentives for electric vehicles to try to increase the market. We're supportive of other technologies as well. There could be, there's a lot of development right now on hydrogen vehicles. The technology is not there right now, but it may be there in 10 years from now. But if we go to a mandate right now, we're going to squeeze out all new technologies such as hydrogen from coming in, because we will have invested everything into the EV scenario. So what we're suggesting is, let's encourage folks who want EVs to buy those vehicles right now. Let's start putting in the infrastructure that we can right now, so we'll have a higher percent of EVs being sold, but let's not put in an artificial mandate that really can't be met. When I talk to folks all around the state, policymakers, etc., no one thinks that this is a doable policy, but they say, when you start off, oh, it's 2035, it's not a problem. It is a problem. It's going to start hitting people in 2027. Investments are going to have to start to be made because you can't just ignore a law. It's going to be the law. So we think we need to take more time, let the market develop. Let's see if costs are coming down. Let's see if new technologies come into being. We could reduce our carbon footprint. We could reduce carbon from our transportation sector. We just can't do it in a way that's going to harm the people who live in the state.
People don't like to be told what to do. I mean, and there seem to be so many regulations, even like on getting rid of certain electric heating situations, gas heating on small businesses. I mean, there's so much changing right now, and I think, I don't know, what are people telling you? Are people just fed up saying, like, you need to back down, literally slow down, back the truck up, beep, beep, back it up?
If you read the governor's energy master plan, they believe in the solution to our carbon, emissions is to go all electric for buildings, all electric for the transportation sector. We think that is a too narrow of a scope. It's setting artificial deadlines. It's setting us up for failure. We literally can't do what they're looking for us to do. So we're just looking for policies that make sense, policies that look out for the well-being of the taxpayer, of the consumer, who are going to have to live with these policies. Let's do things appropriately. Let's do things in the right order, and we could all have a really good future if we do things correctly and smartly.
Yeah, and what works in California may not be a right fit for New Jersey, because you mentioned that they are looking to California as kind of setting the standard there and applying it to New Jersey. Two very different states.
Two very different states. Gas prices in California, for instance, are over $6 a gallon. But I would argue that this mandate is not even going to work in California, unless they're willing to live with the consequences of whole populations not being able to have cars at all. Yeah. So again, there are folks who are pushing these mandates, maybe for ideological reasons, maybe because they think if we mandate it, it will work out. We're not willing to take that chance. We think the consequences are too great. We need to do a policy to reduce our carbon in a manner that's going to work and be good for the citizens of New Jersey.
Ray Cantor of New Jersey Business and Industry Association, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and educate us on this.
Laura, I appreciate the opportunity.
Matthew Peloso is a civil rights and trial attorney based in New Jersey with over 3 decades of experience. He specializes in civil rights and employment litigation, including cases related to harassment, hostile work environments, and discrimination, and is here today to discuss the issue of bullying. Matthew, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Laura.
Absolutely. Well, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, it happens. Holding bullies accountable, though, that's a different story, and it is changing in New Jersey. What can you tell us?
Well, there's a anti-bullying Bill of Rights is what it's called. And it's been around for several years, but it's starting to get some traction now amongst families in the school systems in our state. And it's essentially a statute that attempts to eradicate harassment, intimidation, and bullying. It's actually got an acronym called HIB. And it basically prevents any form of harassment, intimidation, or bullying that's based on race or gender or sexual orientation or any kind of personal disability. And it forces school districts to create and enforce these sort of anti-bullying Bill of Rights within the school policies. And it's unfortunately, it seems that these types of cases are becoming more and more frequent for whatever reason that is. And this statute allows parents, on behalf of their minor children, or if the children happen to be over 18, to bring direct civil actions, not just against the perpetrators, but against the school districts, and force them to compensate victims of bullying.
I think one of the issues is there are laws in place, but they're not always enforced. And even finding information, especially for some of the younger kids or children might have a disability and they're not able to verbalize what's happening, school districts don't always report harassment and intimidation and bullying. How are you finding that transparency with the school districts?
It's up to the parents to first notify the school, and very often if the students are in high school, they do it themselves. And then from that point on, once they're notified of that, the statute requires them to take action, to investigate and to punish any students that are engaging in any form of harassment, intimidation, or bullying.
Yeah, but you find sometimes parents feel very frustrated that perhaps the wheels of justice go slowly, or that the school will say, well, you know what, we investigated, we didn't really see any issues here, kids being kids. What are some of the stories you're hearing on your end by the time people get so fed up that they are contacting an attorney?
Well, you're right that often it does seem to be an ineffective investigation by the schools, for sure. And that's when usually my clients reach out to me, because they are frustrated. And very often, unfortunately, there are other issues that are underlying the HIBs, the harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and those are racial discrimination or gender discrimination or sexual orientation discrimination as well. So the harassment, the bullying statute is very often tied to the other civil rights statutes that we have in the state. And unfortunately, because these are the majority of my cases, unfortunately, the response from the schools do not change the situation. And very often, even worse, the students and the parents who complain about the bullying are then subjected to retaliation, to the extent that they are in fact also whistleblowers. And instead of having the situation stopped, it actually turns into punishment against the students who are making the allegations of bullying, and very often the parents themselves. Yeah, so you're right, it is frustrating.
I want to kind of follow up on this because, you know, there used to be, there's a regular crime and then there's hate crime. So when I'm hearing this about bullying, harassment, intimidation, and bullying, if it has to do with gender, a disability, race, it is a different level of harassment, intimidation, and bullying as opposed to just a kid being mean and cruel to another kid?
It does not necessarily have to be, but that can fall into the statute. But usually there's some basis for that. You're right. There's a distinction that has to be made with regard to whether or not somebody is, just for lack of a better term, some kid is just a jerk. But that's not an excuse. That would certainly fall under the protection of the anti-bullying statute. The whole concept of harassment and bullying has been interpreted now to be broader than just based on straight out racial discrimination or gender discrimination or any of the other so-called protected classes under the civil rights statutes. Right now, just harassing a student for any reason would be violative of the statute and should be stopped by the school.
So can you talk us through a little bit of what someone should do? Because a kid who's being bullied, sometimes they're going to think, well, I'm the problem. Maybe I shouldn't speak up. I'm going to get in more trouble, or I'm going to cause more trouble for myself. So, you know, if you know, I'm coming to you as a parent, or even before we get to the point where we have to use an attorney, what are the steps that students should take? What are the steps parents should take? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because you're right. A lot of bullying goes on because the students don't want to be identified as being, a tattletale or a narc, and they are afraid of retaliation more from their peers than from anything that might happen with reporting it per se from the school. But what they have to do is first they have to ask to see their counselor confidentially at the school. That would be the first step. Or if necessary, go straight to a principal and report what's going on. And the school should make sure that it's confidential so that the student is not retaliated against or attacked further. Obviously, if the student has a good relationship with his or her or their parent, then certainly they could go to their parent first and ask that advice. But that's not always possible for some kids. Some kids don't have that option. And even if some kids did report it to their parents, they might not get the sort of response that they're hoping for. So that is why the school policy allows the student to go and to report it and to do so in a confidential manner so that at the very least, at least at the beginning of the investigation, there's no direct retaliation against the student for reporting that bullying.
And I could see a lot of students who perhaps would be afraid to tell their parents, not because that they did anything wrong, but maybe they don't want to be outed, so to speak. If you're dealing with gender, sexual orientation, maybe parents are not aware, maybe teachers aren't aware, that they don't want people to know. So how have you found those issues?
You're right. I'm sure that there are a lot of students that are concerned about telling their parents about what the actual underlying reason for the bullying is because they're afraid of parental disapproval or worse.
Yeah, there is a judicial crisis in the state of New Jersey. Family courts are, in some areas, they're barely functioning at all. There aren't divorce in certain areas. How is that affecting your ability as an attorney to litigate and to actually bring about justice for students who have been bullied, harassed, and intimidated?
Well, the judicial shortage is a problem, and you're right. The most damaging part of it is because criminal is being taken care of because there are certain constitutional rights to speedy trials. But you're right. The problems are in the family courts and in the special civil part courts, the smaller claims. And there's an old expression, justice delayed is justice denied. And damage can be done before some people can get to court, or there are people being forced into settlements that they may not otherwise want to take because their cases have just been backlogged and held up for so long. And so, unfortunately, from what I'm hearing, there's going to be a continuation of judicial shortages for several reasons. The legislature, I believe, isn't going to meet possibly until after the elections because it's an election year. There are over 50 apparently judicial empty seats now. There are apparently, at least 10 or more expected retirements by the end of the year. And I know that Justice Ravner of the Supreme Court is trying to address these as best he can. He's sent out cases to other counties that were actually docketed in some of these truly overwhelmed and understaffed counties. And so they're trying to deal with the backlog as best they can, but it's difficult. And hopefully, this sort of political issue in many ways, COVID certainly had a major part of it, but then retirements during COVID by judges for whatever reasons. But it certainly needs to be addressed now, and hopefully the legislature will get to that.
As far as the school districts go, if they're sued, is there incentive for them? Because so many, I find that, and what I read, and actually even from some personal experience, is getting a school district to admit there is an issue or to even go along. It is very challenging. Is there something within the statute, within the laws, that incentivizes the school district to work with you, because otherwise they're going to have to pay? And every school district in New Jersey it's all home rule, which ultimately would cost taxpayers if these school districts are ultimately having to pay out big settlements for ignoring or for letting harassment, intimidation, and bullying happen on their property. I know that was a loaded question there, but consequences for school districts.
You're right, and the statute does say that they have to implement and enforce a policy, and if they do it correctly, and there is an appropriate investigation, punishment of the wrongdoers, and it stops, then there shouldn't be a problem. But in my cases, that's not by the time it comes to me, that usually is not what's happening. What's usually happening is the investigation is either flawed by the school district or it's biased, and there is not sufficient punishment to either stop the bullying, or, as I told you, very often it's my clients who are then accused of doing something wrong as a sort of pushback and retaliation against them. And that, unfortunately, is the problem. Is that it can be dealt with ahead of time. It should be, but unfortunately, it always isn't done the right way because the districts don't want to acknowledge that there is the problem. And then by the time I get involved, then that's all through. And obviously it's out, it's in the public, complaints are public. And so then the lawyers get involved on the other side, so to speak, and the case has to make its way through the system.
Yeah, yeah. Victimizing the victim, and then ultimately everybody loses. Everybody loses. But Matthew, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It was good talking to you on this topic. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. And that will do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. Thank you so much for joining us on New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.